Hey everyone, this is Jay Wilburn, and to my side here you see the covers to the Dead Song Legend. Those are six books that are out already, a zombie apocalyptic series. I'm working on book seven now, so that'll be coming soon. Today I'm going to be I'm going to be editing a story called Mile Marker 118. This is going to be part of a Patreon activity I got going on, 31 stories for Halloween on Jay Wilburn's Patreon. So for the month of October, every day in October, there'll be another story on here. This will be one of them, so you're getting a preview of one of them. And there'll be 31 stories. I'm going to do the same thing in December. In November, I'm actually going to do NaNoWriMo live um, that entire month, or until I get to 50,000 words, I guess. NaNoWriMo is National Novel Writing Month, and every November and a couple other times a year, people will um, write a novel. And I'm going to do that live. So, about 2,000, 2,500 words a day, I'll write on this new novel that I'll start that month. Each time I write on that particular work, I'll have other things going on. But each time I write on that particular work, I'll do that on here on Twitch, and then share those videos on my Patreon page afterward. So that's what we got coming up, and Mile Marker 118 will be part of October's goodies on Patreon, but you good people on Twitch will get to see that a little sooner if you tune in. So looking forward to that, and then it's about a 6,000 word story, so there's probably a lot that could be cut. I don't know how much cutting I'm going to do. I'm probably just going to clean up the story just a little bit and then present it the way it is. All right, so let's just go ahead and get started. All right, Mile Marker 118 by Jay Wilburn. Milford Clark engaged the brakes, blasting air from the compressor through every component of the Peterbilt's engine, and heard the wounded dinosaur sound that told him no one was going to die because of him today. The trailer full of sex toys and seal-packed blow-up dolls gave that feel of lost gravity, which would turn into a fishtail if he didn't hold the wheel steady. Milford instinctively looked up for the wigwag, a lever that dropped into view when the compressor fell below half pressure. New rigs had a red light or even a buzzer. He had missed it in the dark the night he was dozing, and that's why Harold Graham died at 16. It wasn't because the kid had smoked one joint before getting back on the highway, but that joint was the only reason Milford wasn't in jail. All right, I'm going to change what was in his trailer. Now, I have nothing against, the joke of he has sex toys and blow up dolls in his trailer, but I think it's distracting in this particular case. I think it's not significant to the story, which again a joke doesn't have to be, but I do think it distracts from the detail of what we're getting to in this particular story. So I'm just going to say dry dog food. So that'll be the change I make there. I've done that joke before in other stories where I include um, sex toys in boxes and other things like that in warehouses and different places. And so I don't think this story needs it, and it's kind of a repeat of things I've already done. All right. He was coming up on it. He needed to get over to the right. He should have been in the right lane already, but now a neon blue Volkswagen passed on the wrong side. Milford slowed further and activated his turn signal. He didn't bother with the horn like he might have before that night. Last night he had trouble staying awake instead of trouble falling asleep. The bug passed him finally, and an old timer in a red pickup waved Milford in. Milford took the gift and flashed his parking lights in gratitude. That night, a wheel had blown out of the rig after Milford plowed half of Harold's Jeep under the front bumper of the Peterbilt. There had been no one else on the road at 2 a.m. to bear witness, but that blown tire would have sounded like a shotgun and felt like an impact to anyone in the red pickup's position. Milford had fishtailed that night. Pieces of tire bigger than the Jeep had flown out from under the trailer, which hauled mattresses instead of perversions. Now, again, we're referring back to that beginning instead of dog food. They had gone together through the guardrail like it was paper. Milford's truck landed in the ditch in one piece, Harold not so much. Milford saw the twisted remains of the guardrail whip by on the right. His eyes took on a pressure that blurred his vision. He gripped the wheel and whitened his knuckles. Sweat creased up between his skin and his skivvies. He braked, but would not let go of the wheel to signal even with the friendly pickup on his bumper. He could feel the trailer of dirty secrets. Okay, again, I guess that was significant to the story. He could feel the trailer wanting to fly free on of the lane like before. He buzzed past the relics under the thin green sign. The right wheels drifted onto the shoulder, adding the gritty sound he remembered for 2 seconds before he made the guardrail join Harold in screaming. The warning track hummed under both profiles of the trucks as the wheels crossed. The red pickup buzzed by as Milford rolled to a stop. His wheels pressed down the grass at the edge of the shoulder. He shook as he stared down into the concrete slough of the ditch. Beer cans, plastic bags, fake flowers, and bits of metal that could still be from the Jeep haunted the drainage trough. More traffic whipped by with the sound that brought to mind arrows fired past his ears. He flipped on his hazards, asking the drivers to spare his life in a way he had not afforded Harold. Milford thought, not for the first time, that if Harold Graham had been a football player or even a band geek, it might have taken more than one joint for him and the trucking company to skirt blame. Harold had the wrong clique for his life to matter. Stoners made bad social justice warriors, at least until they got out of high school. If Harold Graham had a lawyer and a doctor for parents, Milford might be under the jail instead of back in the Peterbilt. Harold's dad had split, and his mother was a waitress with 2 solicitation charges in her past. The trucking company brought it all out into the public as if it explained why Milford dozed while driving a dark highway at 2 in the morning. Maybe it did. Maybe Harold died because he was born under the wrong stars. As Milford thought of his own girls from 2 marriages, he swallowed on a bitter taste growing near the back of his tongue. They would be Harold's too one day if they ever got in an accident involving trucking company lawyers. Like Harold, Jennifer and Tanya's dad split. Like he was trying to ruin their future, Milford ran off with a stripper from his church. Skylar was the daughter of that stripper and an alcoholic trucker that killed a kid in a Jeep for being born under the wrong stars. He lifted the teddy bear from the passenger seat and climbed down to the side of the highway, leaving the driver's door open behind him. Milford towed the ruts of the warning track a few inches past the white line. Those rough bits would hum if tires drifted over them and scare the driver back into his lane. He always jumped them too fast to really hear them. It was grit and then ditch for Milford Clark and Harold Graham. He wasn't even sure if the wheels were still on the Jeep by the time they crossed the warning strip in a hail of sparks and tire rubber. Milford wavered on his feet from the wind of the vehicles and flashing across his field of vision in a blur of color. The vortex threatened to tear the little bear right out of his grasp. He clutched the fur and stuffing tight around the animal's throat with the button eyes staring up at the trucker's hairy arm. He could step out into the lane. If he timed it, the driver wouldn't have a warning to brake. He'd be taken apart like Harold's Jeep. No wheel left to hit the warning track as the pieces of Milford landed from the ditch to the median. His stuffing and buttons and fur would be picked out of the killing machine's grill by men in plastic suits and masks. Let's make mask plural. It would be the day shift guys instead of the old forensic veterans that worked Harold's shift. Where Milford had parked would be all the note he needed to leave. His girls would never understand, but everyone else would. Jennifer was 7, Tanya 5, Skylar 2. They were 4, 2, and newborn back when Harold became 16 forever. Sarah would sit with a girl on each side, and Juliana, with the 2-year-old on her lap. They'd have to be beside each other at the funeral service. Milford smiled at the thought of that nightmare. He turned away from the rolling death on the pavement beside him and walked along the side of his trailer. Some people died because of the stars that cursed them from above. Other folks had to go on living because of their hateful stars. Leaving the truck behind, he approached the mess of flowers, wreaths, and stuffed animals. The wind brutalized the displays. Green wires showed through where flowers pulled free to be claimed by the roadside. The tattered nature of what had been left under the road sign reminded him of the trash caught in the ditch. Milford and Harold had been caught in the ditch one night too. He swallowed several times as he centered himself to look at the numbers stacked in white over green. This spot used to mean nothing except that exit 120 lay ahead with 2 gas stations, 3 fast food places, and Felix Fillmore Bluegrass Museum. Several notes jammed between the post and the memorabilia were folded up the way girls did. Pull here, and do not open, scrawled in marker, faded from light in moisture. A few notes melted closed as the paper pulped into glue and decay. He felt sure others joined the tumble into the ditch. Harold wasn't there to read them anymore. Milford wondered if these note-writing girls had talked to Harold when they attended high school. Some of those co-eds moved off to college. They made their sacrifices and absolved their transgressions under the stars. He crossed his eyes as his breath caught. He waited for the shakes to pass. The sooner he deposited his load at the sex warehouse, again, we're back to his payload at the warehouse. Maybe I should have just left that the way it was. As soon as he deposited his payload at the warehouse, the sooner he could take a drink. This regular, unscheduled stop made his knees weak. The bitter taste turned to hot, tight metal in his throat. The numbness and then stabbing pain in his left arm and chest provided the first clues that this might be something more than guilt and cravings. He opened his eyes to find the world fishtailing. Milford turned and tried to reach the traffic, but his knees and feet filled with molten lead. All those years of hollowing out his legs to fill with Jack and Cokes, and then just Jack, had paid out. If he could step in front of a citizen's transport, this death would mean something. It would be a worthy sacrifice instead of a failure of the heart. He kept the chokehold on the teddy bear as he folded to his knees and then collapsed to his side. He saw warning track, whipping tires, and the flash of hazards. He felt his heart stop. It hurt more by degrees than the jackhammer pain of it trying to keep beating from force of habit. The lack of pressure in the arteries along his neck into his oxygen-starved brain felt very much like the ache of his out-of-control hypertension. He supposed he had it under control now. He felt the strings pull taut between his soul and his brain cells. The last burn of oxygen kept him conscious of the fading world because of the extreme parts of the body that had not yet gotten the message that the operation had been canceled. No more deliveries were coming up the supply chain from the lungs through the heart to the lobes. Check the locker for the pink slip once the trailer unhooks. He faded in and out as his skin cooled and paled. Dirt from exhaust and kicked dust from the street lighted on the sheen of sweat left from his the last secretions of pores. He couldn't draw breath to smell, but he felt sure he had evacuated both bladder and bowels into his drawers. The sweaty grit left his skin ashen and splotchy. I've used the word grit a lot. The sweaty film left his skin ashen and splotchy. He wasn't leaving a pretty corpse at all. The ambulance arrived before dark. Milford couldn't turn his eyes in the sockets but the motion of the gurney showed him flashing bars of light on police cars and a fire truck. They'd need a rig-sized tow truck for the tractor trailer. He wasn't anywhere close to paying it off. He'd have he'd have been better off if he'd died inside and wrecked it for the insurance. Fluorescents rolled one after another overhead, and Milford grew impatient with his own passing. He kept waiting for a lighted tunnel or a lake of fire, but only got a flicker from a failing ballast in the hallway of County. He stared at the tile in the basement for more than a day before he realized he lay naked upon a metal table with a drain. She withdrew his liver and weighed it before he comprehended that she wasn't a surgeon. Milford thought about those stories out of Mexico where some businessman was in a car accident. Let's see, is businessman one word? I believe it is. Or some businessman was in a car accident or bitten by a rare snake, leaving him conscious but appearing dead. The fellow either barely escaped with his life by twitching a finger, or he bled out under the shocked eyes of the coroners. He thought Snopes always proved those stories false. She pulled out his lump of a heart next. The plumbing hung sliced in open nubs. No outpouring of life's blood, so Milford had run dry, or they drained him out during a lapse in his attention. She waited. As a committed drinker, he couldn't decide if he missed the heart or the liver more. She went for the lungs next. He needed to say something, or there'd be nothing to draw air for protest. High school stoners and dead truckers made poor advocates. The lungs were more gummy than he expected. They tore loose in long, clear strings of snotty snail trail looping out of his body as she went to weigh them one at a time. Milford drew air and expelled it through his throat out of force of will more than any logic of the situation. Hey, any chance I could have those back? She cut her eyes at Milford and then back at the scale. She switched out lungs to weigh the other one. He thought they would weigh them together for some reason. Your wife decided not to donate them, so they'll just be thrown out. Such a waste. You should have checked the box on your license. You could have saved lives. He felt a dry sting in the back of his throat. Saving really has never been in my skill set, sorry. Your liver was shot, and obviously your heart wasn't going to be any good, but the rest, who knows? What happens to me next? We sew you up and send you to the funeral home. Your wife will see to arrangements. Milford narrowed his cloudy eyes. Which one? Which funeral home or which wife? She shook her head. Not sure which home, but that's up to your current wife, your last current wife. Can I drive myself? She sighed as she took out another organ, which he thought might be a kidney. Probably best that you call someone. The wife has your wallet and keys, the last wife. How much longer? She huffed, and her chin stuck out in a way that rounded her jawline. He recognized the look. Both wives had the same reaction when he said something they found stupid or frustrating. Sarah did it more than Juliana. Of course, he left Sarah with 2 kids to run off with a stripper turned church choir director. Sarah had more cause to round her jaw at him. If he had lived long enough, he might have had a shot with this coroner. Apparently, she was his type, mildly hostile toward him. Milford tried to remind himself she was probably not often rushed by patients in her line of work. He laid back and tried to relax as much as he could. He hated being cold, and his muscles stiffened painfully. She removed the rib separator from the open cavity as his bone cage folded back together. A cramping pain traveled from the base of his spine up into his jaw. He grunted as the pain turned to throbbing and his legs went numb. Milford gritted his teeth, hoping his legs would still work after all this was over. She prepared a surgical thread that looked rubbery. It hung dark and thick from a large needle, too large. Excuse me. He felt each penetration through the lips of his wound. She took broad strokes, pulling the flesh back together. Milford gripped the curved edges of the table, while the needle made a spongy squeak each time it pulled through the puckers of skin. He dared to glance down and saw the roughshod landscape of his chest. Darkness showed in jagged gaps in the cavity. Milford swelled his chest a bit just to see if the cadaveric stitching would hold. Keep still, she said as she neared his throat. He stared into the globe of light. Sorry, did Juliana take my clothes too? Milford rocked on it. New scene. Milford rocked on his heels on the flagstone patio of the funeral home. He rubbed his fingers together near the handles of the door. Despite the heat, his skin seemed cold. He thought he would take on ambient temperature, but his flesh seemed to hold on to the cold. He pictured himself filling his empty insides with gas station ice and packing in a few beer cans to chill for later. He couldn't figure out what made his fingers slippery, not sweat. The excretion smelled pungent like chemical preservative. He had skipped embalming, though. The air around him clung hot and humid to his body in the borrowed tweed suit. He thought that couldn't be promising for his rate of decomposition. Short-cutting embalming might prove a mistake. He had a habit of screwing up his future. He pulled the doors and entered. Muffled voices drifted from closed doors along both sides of the hallway. The thick red carpet was way nicer than anything he had in his house. Sarah might have recarpeted since he left. He wasn't sure. He pushed the doors and stuck his head inside. The man in glasses at the podium paused with a hand in the air and raised his nose. The elder mourners turned in their rows of chairs to look at the door too. Milford scanned for either wife, but saw no one young enough. The old woman in the open casket looked to be 100. Her fluffy white hair receded to about mid-scalp. Milford didn't know that happened to women. He cleared his throat but felt something solid and fleshy dislodge. He choked on it and then swallowed the piece back down. The flap of broken skin bounced down through Milford's hollow insides. Can we help you this service? This is a service, sir. Sorry, I'm looking for my the Milford Clark service. The man at the podium pushed his glasses higher on the bridge of his nose and pointed. Next one to the left, I think. Thank you. Sorry to barge, really. Milford ducked out. His name clung to a felt board using skinny white plastic letters. A video screen played atonal music as pictures faded in and out every 3 seconds. He saw high school drinking with friends, drinking alone with eyes demon red from flash and film photos, with his kids before he abandoned them in the church in a suit when the girls were baptized. He turned his attention on the door. Milford pulled them open. Guys from work lined the back. A lot had showed up. A lot. Let's say many of them. Many of them had showed up. Distant relatives that lived close enough to not be able to make an excuse filled the middle rows. A few church friends from the congregation he left and the one he joined where he banged the choir director filled the spaces. Juliana sat with her mother on one side, holding Skylar asleep in Grandma's arms. Sarah sat on the other side, closer to the back, with the truckers, with Jennifer and Tanya. A portrait of Milford sat on a stand in the midst of the flowers. Milford didn't recognize the preacher. He was a black fellow, so not from either church. Milford narrowed his eyes and stared across. As he stared across the backs of heads through the room. The pastor's voice went from shouting to an emphatic growl as he transitioned from "we are all broken" to "we all need forgiveness." Was that Juliana's old club owner? Sarah glanced back and closed her eyes. She ducked her head as she skirted out of the row and advanced on Milford. Tom was there. He put his arm around Jennifer after Sarah vacated the row. Milford smiled, feeling the skin on his face pull. He reached for a hug, but she flat-palmed his chest and backed him out the door. Once they were closed in the hallway, Sarah stage whispered, "Why in the hell would you come here today of all days?" He tilted his head and felt something trickle out of his ear. Not to make this all about me, but it is my party. Lower your voice, she shook her head. This is no party. You left a mess. Your whore wife is running wild since you didn't have the decency to write a will. You didn't keep up your life insurance either, so she's getting what she can out of what you left behind. As usual, there's nothing left for my girls. You left them with nothing while you were alive, and you left them with the same now that you're gone. He ran his fingers through his hair. A chunk came loose, and the scalp underneath burned raw. He flicked the hair off his fingers behind him and planted his shoe on top to hide it. Life insurance was through work, right? You helped me fill it out. You had to renew it every 5 years, dummy. I guess your new wife wasn't great with details like reading or making sure we weren't all screwed. I guess not. Is that supposed to be funny? The skin on his cheek threatened to split as he relaxed his jaw. I need to come by to pick up some old stuff. A lot of what I owned got sold off already. They repoed my rig to cover debts. I could use some clothes and a few other things. Really? She rolled her eyes. Everything that was yours went with you when you moved out on us. Right, right. I just meant maybe some of the old stuff in the shed there at the house. She chewed at the inside of her mouth. Tom cleared out most of the shed last summer. We sold what we didn't want to keep and then donated the rest. If I could get some of the cash from what was mine that was sold, that would really help right now. You can't be serious, Milford. Have you not robbed us enough as it is? Could I come by later and see what's left that I might be able to use? Milford looked down the hall at the old folks filing out of the other funeral in slow shuffles. Anything could help. Juliana has packed up the trailer and is cleaning me out. I can't get into my bank accounts, what with my current condition. You are unreal. He raised his eyebrows, opening a sore on his forehead. Yeah, tell me about it. That's not a compliment, dummy. I'm at the end of my rope and I can't seem to find a way to let go. He faced her, but couldn't meet her eyes. I wasn't a good man when we were together, and I'm a shell walking around on 2 feet now. I can't make it better now. I was beyond redemption as it was, but I'm nothing now. Please, Sarah, can you help me out? I can't earn forgiveness at this point. I just need you to decide to give it anyway. She looked at the ceiling and moisture reddened the bottom edges of her eyes. He did that to her eyes a lot. She cut her eyes at the door behind her where they could hear the preacher's rhythm, but not make out the words. She said, you come by later this afternoon. Tom is taking the girls to the park to give me time to deal with financials from all this. The girls are trying their best to grieve you. They don't need you barging back into their lives, making this whole process longer, harder, and more confusing for them than it has to be. Thank you, I understand. He'd probably say thanks. Thanks, I understand. She pulled her lips into a thin line and shook her head. This is not a free-for-all. Let's make that dashes. Okay. Free for all. For you, Milford, you only take what was yours, which isn't much. The girls were never going to have much to remember you by anyway. Got it. She turned away. I have to get back inside. The girls need me. Her voice broke on the end of her words. As the doors swung closed, the video faded out from a picture of Milford standing on a fishing boat facing a marsh to him kneeling and laughing between the girls holding sparklers. Jennifer had her mouth wide open. Tanya's teeth showed and her eyes bulged wide with fear. That encapsulated their personalities. That was who they were when he left. He didn't really know anymore. He turned away and walked for the exit. His knee caught and he limped as the joint cracked. Milford took on a pace that matched the last of the people leaving the other funeral. All right, new scene. He pushed open the shed and saw neat tables and tools hung on pegboards. Those must have been Tom's. They really hadn't left him with much. Milford pushed the sheet metal door away to gain more light. The points of 2 screws stuck through the inside of the door where Milford had clumsily attached the latch. Tom had made a number of improvements since taking over husband and father duties, but the screws in the shed door remained as a deadly reminder of Milford's handiwork. The rest of the organization bore evidence that Sarah had upgraded. He knelt and opened toolboxes. I assume that is a compound word. It is. He knelt and opened toolboxes and rubber container lids under the tables. He found deflated pool toys and old craft materials. This is the stuff you kept? He didn't see the girls' toddler toys he had stored. The seashells they collected from the beach were missing. They could have been moved inside, but he suspected Sarah had tossed them. The old Louis L'Amour Western paperbacks he had saved from his father were gone, too. He always meant to bring them to the trailer, but never got around to it. Juliana had sold off his father's lighters and knives that he did bring, so he was getting burned on both ends. Milford stood slowly. Something on the back of his leg popped, and he felt the suit pant leg grow wet and greasy. He spied the old flyer bike on plastic hooks on the back wall. He stretched to lift it off over the riding lawnmower. The wheels pulled free of accumulated cobwebs. I think cobwebs is a compound word too. Apparently all I'm doing today is fixing compound words. He brushed at dirt and flicked an abandoned hornet's nest out from under the seat. The daddy hornets left to go chase stripper butterflies. He rolled the bike through the gap between benches. Metal hissed against metal as the wheels turned for the first time in years. Oh, thanks, man. Come on in. I'm just in the middle of the story at this point. Hope your work is going well. All right. Rolled the bicycle through the gap. Okay. Rust shed from under fender hoods like sawdust. He caught the kickstand with his heel and brought it up before shouldering the door open again. He steered the bike out into the yard to have a look at the door as the door swung closed again. The tips of screws caught his back, first tearing the borrowed coat, then snagging the flesh underneath. Milford cursed as he tore his body free of the metal. Every time he used the shed, he made a conscious choice to avoid catching those screws. Dealing with the bike had given him no hands to avoid disaster this time. He twisted the stiff neck to his shoulder and arched his back to see the damage. The tweed ripped in a triangle patch that showed colorless cotton lining inside. Through the rip of the material, his skin had a rubbery texture with a hint of blue. The skin tore open in a ribbon that dangled along his back to the waist. Milford couldn't decide if it was worse to leave it to snag on something else or to yank the hanging flesh off entirely. If he still had kidneys, they'd be punctured for sure. Yeah, glad it's going well. He swung one leg over the bike and started to pedal up the slope of the yard. The incline, the thick grass made for a rough start. Following along the chain link fence, he veered into the top of it once. Milford hissed and stole a glance at his forearm. The coat hadn't torn this time, but he felt the impact wound separate down to the muscle in his forearm. He left Sarah and Tom's yard and rode away along the old neighborhood street. The girls had not returned home, and he didn't go in to bother Sarah with a goodbye. Milford had finally managed to keep one promise to his wife. If you can only keep one, might as well make it the last one. The bike had no gears, and only the coaster brakes using the pedals. As more and more rust and grime shook loose, the ride became more natural. He couldn't remember which arm to use for signals, so he just looked for cars and kept riding. With the tougher hills, he pumped slowly, feeling the lack of oxygen and the absence of energy processing in his thighs. He stood up on the pedals, but couldn't tell if that made the work better or worse. Something gave in his right thigh. It came with a release of pressure, like popping a pimple. As he coasted down the next hill, Milford took his foot off the pedal and shook his leg. A loose bit shimmied down his pant leg and fell out in a fillet of flesh onto the pavement. That looked like a lot of skin. Milford bent his legs a few times. The joint proved more flexible, but he could tell he had lost some muscle along with the outer layer. He started pedaling again. He leaned forward to ride the flyer through the next curve. The skin on his left shoulder stretched to its limit and broke open along his shoulder blade. He could tell it was going to hold on by a few slivers, but he flexed his arm and turned his body a few times on the seat to finish the tear. He shook his arm out until 3 or 4 loose bits dropped out of his sleeve. Shedding pounds already, he was breathy and heard a wheeze as he reached the end of the exhale. I miss my lungs. He kept pedaling and tried to remain aware of any other changes with his body. All right, next scene. He didn't realize how many hills marked his trailer park as he made his way back. He took little comfort on the downhill sections because he knew they would be uphill on the way to the main road again. Neighbors that he recognized but hadn't spoken to over the years eyed him for a moment, but each turned away. Milford took off the coat and let it fall to the street. The shirt soaked through in green, yellow, and black stains from expansive wounds his ride had opened up along the way. He wanted to take off the shirt, but the exposed portion of his arm and neck had reached the dark, wrinkled texture of muscle. He wasn't sure more sun and exposure would serve him. As he pulled to a stop on the empty parking pad, he could see the eviction notices and padlock over the door of the trailer. Whatever Juliana had taken was gone, and whatever she left would have been trashed. He clicked his tongue against the roof of his mouth, feeling the ulcers there. His tongue found in a couple dry sockets where teeth were missing. He didn't recall losing them. He must have swallowed them without noticing. He could not remember the last time he ate. I'm really letting myself go. What's that? Milford turned his head and heard the cords in his neck tighten like strings ready for the bow. A guy in a rusty pickup rolled to a stop. The bed lay piled full of trash and scrap metal. As Milford looked the vehicle over, he decided the guy was a picker, coming around to collect what others dumped off in order to turn a profit. They tended to hit the trailer parks between storage unit auctions. My wife left me, sort of, I guess, Milford shrugged. The guy raised an eyebrow. Yeah? Happens to a lot these days, more when the economy starts to pick up. Milford looked at the trailer again as he straddled the bike. The metal skirt around the base of the trailer peeled away to darkness underneath. It reminded him of his own poorly sewn chest. He said, I need to get going. Don't we all, the man said from the truck window. You trying to get healthy? Milford stared at his arms as he gripped the handlebars. He saw stretches of white bone through the broken shirt and separated muscle. He remembered seeing the news report about heroin addicts in Russia using a chemical substance called crocodile. It cut off blood vessels and the skin rotted right off to the bone, with the kids still moving around. He used to wonder how they could keep moving like that. Milford shook his head. Sometimes you just keep going out of habit because you don't know how to lay down and die, or you just lack the good manners to do so. Sometimes you can't figure out how to roll past that one spot in life that has you hung up, some rough spot in your life or a choice you regret. The driver opened his door and rummaged through the junk in the back. You got to find a way by that marker in your life or it'll take you apart. Even if you don't think you deserve to move on, you should. Let me help you out there. You're looking kind of flat. Milford flexed his fingers. As the tendons played along the bone, bits of meat dribbled out onto the concrete pad at his feet. What? The driver hooked the compressor to the lighter outlet on the dash and rolled the cord out toward the bike. Your tires, you're a little flat. Oh yeah, it's been a while since I've ridden. Wife got the truck. The ex sold everything else. Milford scratched at his cheek and came away with gore and skin under his nails. He scraped his fingers to flick the stuff away. Did someone throw away that compressor? You'd be surprised what folks dump off. The driver cranked up the motor on the compressor. He hooked onto the front tire and then produced a pressure gauge. The picker put the knee of his jeans down on a bit of gooey flesh Milford had dropped. The fluid absorbed into the man's pants. Another wet bit fell from the bone and landed on the guy's thigh. Milford wrinkled his nose, creating another split along his face. He hoped the guy didn't notice the gore dripping onto him. The picker switched to the back tire. I went 40 psi for you. That is standard for most bike tires like this. Good luck holding your air and wherever you're headed. Milford pictured the wigwag dropping down from the roof of his cab. If his brakes had full air pressure, had full air pressure in the compressor, he might have stopped in time. Even if he still blew the tire, it might have been enough. If he had picked a rest area before 2, he would have never been at that marker when Harold was. Milford had wanted to get home, though. He pushed to get in the miles before he ran out of hours. He just wanted to get where he was going, same as everyone else. I think you're good now. The picker silenced the compressor and rolled up the cord. Thanks. Milford rolled out over the curb and away from the trailer without waiting on the picker to pack up again. The man called at his back. You got somewhere to go? Milford's face twitched where the skin still connected to muscle. Yes, somewhere to go that I never should have left by all rights. Take care of yourself. He saw the overpass ahead of him, past the gas station. A car honked at him as it buzzed around. He knew the highway was off limits for bikes and hitchhikers, but getting arrested was not his biggest concern. He wasn't sure a criminal record would even stick to his name anymore, and at worst, he'd have a place to wait. Is there any better place to rot away than a jail cell? I'm probably past due for being locked up anyway. Jail or 6 feet under, maybe. He had trouble catching his breath after riding for so long and without his lungs. He had stopped paying attention to where parts of himself had shed. Milford took the on-ramp and dodged debris along the shoulder as he pedaled with the flow of traffic. The distance to the spot closed slower than in the truck, but it drew closer just the same. He lifted his eyes to note the sad altar lay in sight, but he still had a lot of ground to cover for an out-of-shape rider. Let's do dashes and out of shape. All right. His feet started to cramp, but he kept them on the pedals and kept spinning. He rolled by the twisted guardrail and lifted his feet to coast to a stop. He towed down the kickstand and climbed off. His legs pitched against the joints from side to side. He limped forward toward the green and white sign with abused flowers underneath it. He dropped to his knees and then his backside, facing the memorial. Fighting with his laces, he pulled his shoes off. His discolored socks clung wet to his feet. Milford peeled them off and had his surviving teeth gritted. A snow of flake skin salted away to reveal ulcers wide enough to see bone. The feet and calves swelled and showed deep purple as they leaked through his soles. Fluid pooled without his heart to stir it around. He watched it ooze out of the breaks in his skin, darkening the asphalt under him. Milford fought to cross his legs in front of the pictures, notes, and flowers from Harold Graham's loved ones. The wind blew hard enough when cars weren't racing by. Another note tumbled down the grass into the concrete drainage basin where Harold died and Milford stopped really living. Tufts of hair sailed out on the wind after the note. A pink flower popped loose of the wire and hopped along the gritty shoulder of the highway. I've used grit too much. Across the sandy shoulder of the highway. Skin flaked from Milford's shoulders as the shed flesh slipped out of his shirt onto the wind. The bones lost their connection and shifted into, have I used shifted yet? No. Into sick angles inside his borrowed clothes. The wind rippled his shirt as Milford closed his eyes. He wanted to sleep, but opened his milky eyes to stare at the marker again. A yellow semi roared by with a healthy gust, and the bike fell with a clatter. Milford did not know which bones still connected inside his clothes, but he made no effort to stand to right the bike again. He had no plans to go on from there. The wind took apart the memorial under the sign bit by bit. Milford Clark's eyes remained locked in place through it all. All right, so that is the end of that little strange esoteric story. Like I said, this story is going to be part of 31 Stories of Halloween on my Patreon page. I'll have a story every day for 31 days for people to enjoy there. And of course, anybody who sees this video on Twitch before then gets a sneak preview. So thank you everybody for listening in, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.